I like to believe that I can say Fela Durotoye properly, okay? All right? So, Fela is a hands-on person. He says what he wants to do, and he sets himself targets. Now, I like people who set themselves targets, especially when they set targets that are time targets. And so, Fela is committed to building a better Nigeria. And actually, his target for doing that is December 31st, 2025. Fela studied in Nigeria, but he's also an alumnus of the Kennedy School of Government in Harvard and Yale University. He also is a presidential aspirant for the upcoming Nigeria presidential election, which will be on in February next year. So, Fela, we are very honored to have you here today, and it's my pleasure to invite you now to give a keynote.
Thank you very much. Well, good morning, everyone. I thought I would get a heartier good morning than that. This is the one that should come after lunch. That one I just got now. You know, good morning, everyone. Good morning. All right, my name is Fela Durotoye, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be here. Thank you so much, Professor Mokai and Victor. Okay, that's the way I go forward. Okay, thank you. For the opportunity to deliver the keynote address at this year's Africa Summit. I think that the theme towards a prosperous and integrated Africa really speaks to the vision that is already also being framed by the Vision 2063 African Union plan and strategic plan of action. I think that my job today is really just to set the tone for much of the conversations that need to go on. I've been asked to speak on what is called the strategies for the 21st century Africa. And before I go on, it's really a pleasure to be here in Nottingham. And one of the things I remembered was the moment I got the invitation from Nottingham, it just threw me back many years. I remember in 1979, and some people would say, wow, that was BC or AD, not sure, but in 1979, I got my first computer game, and it had only 2 discs that it could play. One of them, I think it was an Atari game console, really simple thing. It had only 4 buttons. One could go up, left, right, and down, and enter. That was all it could do. And the first game was Space Invaders. It was, and it had this thing that was like Pac-Man. But then the other one was actually this football league. And that league there were only 2 teams on that you could play with. It was Liverpool Football Club and Nottingham Forest. And so you didn't have any other choices as to which one. So whoever it is that you were playing, you either played Liverpool or you played Nottingham. I found out that every time I played Nottingham, I won Liverpool. The guys were doing, if I played Liverpool. So at one point in time, I started believing that the Nottingham was actually a better team, even though it was really the game console that I was playing. So when I was coming in, the first thing I was extremely happy was, I'm not coming to the home of Nottingham Forest. So I'm glad to be here. Today I have 3 kids. I've come a long way since 1979. I have 3 kids, and they play on a different kind of console. So they play the PS4, and when I look at the kind of console that they use and the number of gadgets and options and things that they do with it, many times my brain just can't wrap around getting the kind of things that these guys are able to do. And it talks to us about the kind of challenges that we face going and dealing with this generation of not just people, but the 21st century, the power of technology. I don't think there's ever been a generation that is as empowered as the 21st century generation, that, when it comes to information and communication and the capacity to just do great things, the ability to transform ideas into reality, and the fact that also technology is actually making the world a smaller place. Because now, before my generation goes to visit the internet, and I found out that these days my children come from the internet to visit us, and so they spend more time doing things online. Even their homework is online. Different kinds of things are happening today. And for the future of Africa and for the future of our various countries as we look to collaborate, we need to begin to think differently. Which takes me to a few of the slides I'm going to be sharing with you, and I will try to very quickly put my thoughts around the 3 strategies that I think are critical for us to be able to build a prosperous and integrated Africa. But the first question I want to ask you is, can you please tell me where this gentleman is facing? Is he looking towards the exit, or is he looking towards the participants in this crowd? Oh, thank you very much. Thank you, Fatoumata. It is Fatoumata, yes. Fatoumata, the ladies the African ladies are amazing. She says it depends on which way you're looking at it. Because, we have a very popular musician in Nigeria, and the music artist by the name Two-Face. And sometimes I always joke when I use this slide, I think this must have been the original Two-Face, right? But the point that we make here is very simple, that this speaks to an issue that is extremely, extremely pertinent to why we're here, especially in this room, called perspective. Because perspective is really everything. And so you hear people say things like, it's not the way things are that matters, it's the way we see them. And I think that the challenge is that the power of perspective is that it shapes not only the way you see things, but the way you interpret them. And if it shapes the way you interpret them, then it shapes your decisions that you make regarding what those things are. And obviously your decisions then influence your actions. Your actions, if consistent enough, can become habits, and then over time will produce results that will become your culture. And then before you know it, that will also then become the reputation that you get and the brand equity that you build. So you realize that, for instance, when most people look at Africa, some people, depending on what perspectives they have, are either seeing a sinking continent or a rising continent, depending on how you want to see it. Those who think it's a sinking continent are going to be trying to do everything they can to get the next visa that they can get out of Africa, get on the next plane out of Africa. And somebody once said something that was very interesting. He says, what is it that Africans don't know about Africa? What is it that we don't know? He said, look to the back end of any plane leaving Africa, and you will see a lot of Africans in it. Look into the front end of a plane coming into Africa, and you will see a lot of non-Africans in it. So what is it that we are running away from that the world is running to? And I think to a large extent it is in part because we have this misunderstanding of who we are and what we do. And so I want to just show you another very interesting perspectives analogy, and then I hope that I can quickly begin to drill this down to what it is. So I'm asking, what do you see? Anybody? Let me give you a couple of options, all right? Do you see courage, or do you see self-restraint? Okay. Aha! Now, I guess the first time it was depending on how you looked at it. Now it's depending on what you look at. In other words, now we're seeing what the power of focus can do as it relates to the interpretation that you get from the picture. That it is, some people would look to Africa and they would see opportunities and they would see a growing middle class. Some people would see, when they look at that, at Africa, they would see problems and political crisis and the different kinds of issues, inflation. And it depends on which angle you're looking at. It's not that both of them do not exist in the same picture, but you're going to have to choose what to focus on. In fact, someone once said, focus creates blindness. And it is important enough that you choose what to focus on, but it's also important that sometimes you have to choose carefully what your blind spots are. In other words, it's not everything you have to put into your heart. I mean, we have here today, as part of the panelists and speakers, some of the brightest African entrepreneurs and businessmen that are doing amazing things. And one of the things that you find out is that they would say to you that every time you choose to go and make an investment, there would always be a lot of people who will say to you all the reasons why you should not. And risk-taking is never really about ignoring risk, but it's about focusing on opportunity. Because you will never be able to completely averse risk. So, you know, I mean, and the story about this is very simple. This is the final training that canine dogs and the police training school have to go through. Having been trained on how to be everything, how to sniff drugs, how to scale heights that are 4 times their body length, how to, you know, having been trained, fully trained on how to catch, not deter, but catch thieves. These ones are not the kind of dogs that my friend had when he put a "Beware of Ferocious Dog" sign on his gate, only for me to find out that it was this little poodle that he had in his house. And he said, well, as long as the sign does the work, this poodle doesn't have any work to do. Yeah? So the point that I'm making here is that, you know, when they've trained all these dogs on all that they need to be able to do, there's one little challenge that they have. And that challenge is making sure that the dogs are still within the control of the handlers. And that the dogs don't get carried away with the moment they see a drug dealer trying to make that transaction and start barking, and then the drug dealer runs away and they really can't get that drug deal on record. So now this is called the heel test. It's the final test that they have to perform. I mean, having done everything else, they arrange these dogs and they think that it's time for graduation, and then all of a sudden they perform the heel test. And they send this robust, precarious, mucus, and you can use all the kind of, this cat. And you can imagine that it's testing everything that they have in them. This, to me, I believe, is the valley of the shadow of death. Because somehow or the other, it just takes one dog to go completely and to have forgotten the lessons that they taught him. And I think that, again, like many of us, you know, there are many challenges that make us want to run away from Africa. There are many challenges that make us not want to come back to Africa. I mean, someone was just sending me something on Instagram this morning and sharing with me and says, oh, it's such a great thing that you're going to be speaking today at the keynote address. How are you going to address the fact that the British government has just, you know, removed, or not removed, but eased up the restrictions that are around medical, non-EU medical personnel. And the idea is to be able to attract those medical personnel from non-EU countries, especially, as you can imagine, Africa, right, to come and supplement for the gaps in their own healthcare capacity. And the person wanted me to say, is this a good thing or a bad thing? And I may be able to address it in a few minutes if I can quickly run through my slides. But one of the things that you'll find out is that there are many things that will have to cause us to heal, to stop and consider. Africa is going to have to decide, are we continuing on the pathway of just constantly, you know, selling raw material to the rest of the world and being a dumping ground for finished goods? Are we just going to continue to be a market for finished goods, and yet we're just the source of the beginning of the value chain? But you know, I've always said to myself, I know what they taught the dog. My biggest challenge is, what did they teach the cat? Did they tell the cat, you know, don't worry, none of the dogs are going to attack? Did they tell no, I don't think that they taught the cat anything about the dogs. In my opinion, I think they taught the cat something about the cat. I think what they taught the cat was, now, the world may not yet know who you are. And these dogs definitely may take you for granted, but if it's okay, let us tell you who you are, and should any one of them try to make a move, you are permitted to take them out. And the question that I really came here to challenge those who are listening, especially the students of the University of Nottingham, and I know we're connected around the world, is, do we know who we are? Does Africa know who it is? What's our perspective on Africa. Because no doubt about it, many times when you look at Africa, you see something like this, and I think that it's easy for everybody to quickly conclude, Africa must be the one on the left, blessed beyond measure, with sometimes very little to show for it. You look at other nations that literally have nothing beneath their soil. You look at nations like Dubai, you look at nations like Singapore, you look at nations like South Korea, and you look at all that they've been able to accomplish with little or nothing. And then you look at this mineral-rich continent, and we're constantly still looking up to these guys. You look at the nations that came. Malaysia took an oil palm seedlings from Nigeria. So many of you have heard that in the 1960s. Today, Malaysia is the largest exporter of oil, palm oil. And when you think about that, well, we might also then be saying, very sadly, that Nigeria is one of the largest importers of palm oil from Malaysia. So, question is, why do we have this paradox of such a blessed continent and yet very little to show for it? How do you have the 7 fastest growing countries in the world and yet you also have inflation in some of these countries and all across Africa that is perhaps the highest in the world? How do you have a growing number of children in schools, but you have an even faster growing rate of children out of school? How do you have a growing middle class, and yet because the value of the currencies are declining, and now the public institutions are not delivering service? So now, when I was growing up, I went through to public school, and public school prepared me for leadership in life. And now my children are going through private schools, and I'm having to pay through my nose to get the same kind of education that prepared me. So now the middle class really is being robbed of their purchasing power. And so now you see here that something that is very interesting, that a lot of, when people look at the numbers and the statistics, sometimes they look at Africa and they see this very incredible bright spots, but when they come in, their experience is quite different. So a lot of companies are coming in, and then 2 years, 3 years later, they're moving out. They're scaling down. And it's only the countries that really have faith in our companies that have faith in Africa that are staying and say we can do something. How is it that you can have a people so blessed and yet so poor? And my analysis has shown it's always because we are passing over opportunities repeatedly. Because when you look at Africa, everything we complain about really is an opportunity to create value. And the rest of the world sees those opportunities, but we want to run to where those opportunities, those problems have been solved, rather than accepting responsibility to solve those problems. So for me, I think the greatest challenge that we have with Africa today in the 21st century is, how do we build leadership across all levels of Africa? How do we change the mindset that plagues Africa today, that thinks that, look, it's the government that must do everything for us? And how do we go from a place where we are hoping and looking for things to work to a continent that we are the ones that are looking to make things work? And understanding the challenges there. And I think that throughout today, you will be listening to people who have taken the challenge and are making things work, and not just waiting for things to work. So somebody once said that, today this story is almost like much of who the African is. Someone, 1.2 billion people strong, and yet it seems like we're constantly thinking that we're tied to aid. We're tied to foreign direct investment. And yet, whilst it's very interesting that there is a great, and vibrant diasporan community that sends money home, it's interesting that that money doesn't come back as investment. It only comes back to keep people existing and feeding. I keep saying to people, why are you sending the next £100 home to buy a meal that will finish just about the next time you need to send the next £100? Why don't you ask for a business plan before the next £100 comes? Why don't you send money home to invest in a business? Whether it succeeds or fails, does it matter? In the end, if there was no business, then failure was guaranteed anyways. And I'm saying, can we begin to find ways to do three things? And this is what I will begin to close my thoughts with. Number one, can we begin to get an inspired Africa? Number two, can we get an informed Africa? And number three, can we get our brightest and best to get involved? And I'm going to be talking about 4 sectors in which people will need to get involved, but permit me to quickly just start by saying, I don't know how many of you really feel something tugging your heart when you look at this. But it speaks to the fact that we have a generation and a great potential, as we just talked about, but it seems like our mindset is really where the greatest African challenge has always been. It's the mind. It's us finding out that those who amongst us have become have been given the opportunity to get an education, have been given an opportunity to get ahead in life, think of escaping poverty rather than uplifting others with the privilege that you have gotten. A couple of weeks ago, I had the privilege of speaking at the London Business School at a similar summit like this. And my major message to them was that the greatest countries in the world do 2 things. Number one, they identify the best and the brightest amongst them, and then they encourage and then empower them with opportunities to access positions of authority and power. But the second thing is that those guys then understand that this privilege must become a right to others. So when I have the opportunity to get a good education in University of Nottingham, it's not so that I can be better educated than my peers. It's so that I can then go back and then set up a similar curriculum, and sometimes maybe in partnership with University of Nottingham, and take that back to Kenya, and take that back to Lagos, and take that back to Ghana, to Accra, and see how do we lift up the other people who didn't get the opportunity. How do we understand that a me privilege is for a we benefit? That is the greatest challenge that we are facing today in Africa. Those who brought us independence were thinking of we, not me. But those who have brought us economic decadence have put me ahead of we. They put profits ahead of value. They put prosperity ahead of posterity. And so today, I'm challenging to say, we must not be like these guys. Because those in this room are the privileged. You are the enlightened. But you must remember, and I don't know whether you can quickly look at this, but basically this says, these guys are in a sinking boat. And then these 2 guys really doing pretty much nothing are saying, I'm sure glad the hole isn't at our end. Meaning, you know what? If I'm okay, then we're okay. I'm going to be showing you a very short video very soon. But basically, that's what they're saying. If I can get a generator, then you know what? It doesn't matter whether there's power. If I can get a nice sports utility van, a Jeep or any of those things, then it doesn't matter whether the roads are bad. If I can go to school in the University of Nottingham, then it doesn't matter what's going on, and many times we kind of forget that we all have roots in the grass. And that there is no matter how far your branches go across, there is also, your heart is still connected to someone back home. Someone was saying to me, so what's going to happen? I think most of Nigerian doctors are really going to be very, very excited at the kind of, the lessening of the restrictions. I'll give you a few statistics that might help you to understand what I'm talking about. In the year 2010, there was one Nigerian doctor to 2,531 patients. Within 7 years, that number had risen to one Nigerian doctor to 6,000 patients. Just so that you put this in context, the world average is one doctor to 600 patients. It said that Nigerian doctors work 4 times harder for 1/4 of the pay. And so when a poll was done in 2017, they found 88% of the doctors that were polled were actively looking to relocate. Actively, they had applied to somewhere outside Nigeria to relocate out of Nigeria. In fact, just so that you understand this, as at April 25, 2018, there were 5,250 Nigerian medical doctors working in the United Kingdom. Somehow, within 10 days or so, May 5, 2018, another 14 doctors had joined. Today, over 50% of the 72,000 registered medical doctors that graduated from Nigeria, over 50% of them are already working outside Nigeria. Now, I don't know what those statistics are like for all across Africa, but this is the idea. I mean, when you see that people are looking to run away from their own country, what do you do? And what can the problem be? And why? And so this is where my thoughts really would have to come very concisely. The first thing is I need you to understand that there are 4 sectors that run every economy. The first sector, in my opinion, is what you call the policy sector. And this is a sector that is populated by elected officials and appointed officials. And their job is to essentially frame the policy that would shape the environment in which people would operate, whether it becomes an enabling environment or a disabling environment. The second sector that shapes the economy is the public sector. And the public sector is literally the interpreters of the policy that the policy sector has been able to form. It is the public sector that is the bureaucracy, the civil service, and they are basically supposed to have the mandate to implement not the policy, but the interpretation of the policy, so that it begins to work for the private sector, which is the third sector I want to talk about. The private sector, who are the executors of policy. The last thing, however, we found out is that there is a sector that actually shapes what happens in each one of those sectors, and it's the political sector. And it's very interesting that when you look at the political sector, this is one of the places where you would notice that our brightest and best usually don't want to have anything to do with. Most of the people who are who you see in Africa, especially the young people in Africa, typically do not vote. They typically are not members of political parties. And when you ask them, why are you not a member? Why are you not an executive? Why are you not a delegate? And they would say to you, no, politics is dirty. And yet politics, out of that political space, is where your policy sector is populated from. Because it's only the people who come, especially within the democratic governments, that you would find out of political parties, that they then, you have your elected officials. And then your elected officials appoint people like themselves. And then those people together influence the public sector in the way that it carries out what it does and how it empowers or disempowers the private sector. So if you really want to fix Africa, you've got to fix the political sector. In fact, today I was very, very glad when one of the great, and you will be listening to him, I think it's Justin, I'm not sure, Shane. Yes, when Justin had asked him, so what needs to be fixed? And this is a gentleman who's done really a great and amazing businesses all across Africa, building hotels all across Africa. And I was praying in my heart, it had to be this one thing that I believe that has to be fixed. And I was so happy when he said, I think that we need to fix the political space. That if we fix the political space, Africa will be all right. These were his words, and I believe, and you will hear more from him. This is someone who's been there, who's done that, and come back to the same conclusion. If we don't fix that foundation sector and get our brightest and best to get involved, then really there's nothing much more that can be done. So how then, or what is the strategy that we must have? Number one, we must get and inspire Africa, especially our brightest and best, to get involved. Not just with the political sector, but also with the public sector. Today, I know that most people, if you are told to go back after your wonderful PhD, how many of you, just a quick one, how many of you know anyone who works in the water works or public water works institution in your countries of origin? How many of you know somebody who works in public water works? And you see probably 3 hands or 4 hands. Most times in Nigeria, nobody, we don't know. And you'll be amazed that how then do you expect for water to come out of our taps without boreholes? If the brightest and best are not going to serve the rest. We need to make sure that we go back and we have to inspire our people to serve. That leadership is service, not just power. Number 2, we need to make sure that we get an informed Africa, which means we've got to invest heavily in education. And today, Africa's education is geared towards just preparing people to receive certificates. We need an education system that prepares people for success in life. We need an education system that teaches people more than ABC, but really how to lead. To understand that from the age of 8, children should be understanding what leadership means. They should understand what enterprise means. They should understand what ethics, work ethics and life ethics, what do they mean? What does the word excellence mean? What does integrity mean? Values need to be driven into the school curriculum rather than just teaching about subjects that they will never have to use later in life. And we need to have the opportunities for internships and work opportunities from when students are already 13 years old and 14 years old. They must go and spend 1 week out of their holidays making sure that they get into organizations. And then we need to have mentoring. And those who have done greatly need to become mentors, not only to the students, but also to the teachers. Because if the teachers are themselves not inspired, how can they give inspiration to the children? We need to begin to see how we can inform Africa. Africa needs to be educated. We need an educated Africa, not just a certified Africa. The last thing is we need to get involved. In the political space, we need to get involved. One of the most important things that people say to me about the fact, Fela, thank you for running. Because now you've shown us that it is possible for somebody who's young and who has done things and who has excelled in his field, in the private sector, to say, listen, I'm going to serve the rest. And it's not easy. It's not easy. People ask me every time, how is it going? It's not easy. But it's work that must be done. And people need to begin to say, how do we get our brightest and best to run for office at all levels? Whichever level it is that you find comfort and your vision is accustomed to or attuned to. But then how do we also get the people to vote? To vote their vision of the Africa that they want to see, or at least the countries that they're living in that they want to see. How do we get them to identify their values and look for values in the candidates and vote according to values, not parties? Because across Africa today, we're not seeing ideology. We're just seeing the quest for power. And the last is, how do we get diasporans to get involved? Because across especially in Nigeria, the laws do not allow diasporans to vote. And whilst we're trying to see how we can do everything we can to see that law changed, and given the opportunity as President of Nigeria, I promise that within the next 4 years, diasporans will be able to vote. Because they are contributors of almost 40% of our GP. And so the idea is, how are we going to make sure that people get involved? And this, for me, is the most important idea. That our brightest and best get inspired to fix their country. Let them begin to build information, not just about the things you're learning here in Nottingham or wherever it is you are. Learn more about what's going on in Africa and in your country of interest, whether it's your country of origin or just a country of interest. And most importantly, please get involved. Don't just sit down and allow things to happen. I'm going to show you just a 2-minute video, and then I will bring these thoughts to a close.
सर आपके लिए उस पार कार का इंतजाम किया है सर। सर आइए सर। ये चल।
कुछ करो ना।
अब मैं वहाँ जाके क्या उखाड़ूँ?
कैसी जाने बूंदे आई, जाने कैसा दर्द लाई, सामने क्या है ये तेरे, क्यों रुका है तू बता दे। कौन तुझको पार लेगा, कौन होगा वो मसीहा, वो जिसे तू ढूंढता है, वो ही है तू वही है। तुझ में तेरा रास्ता है, तुझ में तेरा है सहारा, तू ही तुझको पार लेगा, तू ही है तेरा किनारा। तुझ में तेरा रास्ता है, तुझ में तेरा है सहारा, तू ही तुझको पार लेगा, तू ही है तेरा किनारा। ढूंढता है तू ही रे, तू ही रे तेरा मसीहा हो।
So, in summary, if we're going to build a prosperous and integrated Africa, especially along our Vision 2063 targets and goal areas in infrastructure and energy, trade and investment, peace and security, rural economy and agriculture, human resource and science and technology, if we're going to do all of these most amazing things all across Africa, we must first and foremost find strategies that get our brightest and best involved. And to do that, we must get them inspired, get them to want to do something more than just live a life for themselves. They must want to live for others. Number two, they must get informed about not only the things that are on ground and the situation on ground, they must get involved, inspired, and informed. And most importantly, they must get their hands on to be able to get things working. I hope that across today you would hear from the people who are inspired, informed, and involved, and you also will get inspired, you also will learn and get informed, but most importantly, you will get involved. Thank you very much for your time.